Get out of our hair and let us work. We're doing everything we can.
Welcome to Film Freaks Forever.
Film Freaks Forever.
We're your host. I'm Mark Jordan Legan.
And I'm Phoef Sutton.
And this edition, the Film Freaks go down a dark alley.
Down a dark, mean street with Venetian blind shadows all over
It's
us.
been raining all night.
The rain is going to wash this city clean.
We're very excited about this edition because we are going to shine a light on three great, underrated crime noirs. We have really enjoyed talking to you guys about like bad, weird, campy superhero movies, and then the evil ventriloquist dummy subgenre. And of course, our very first podcast, we highlighted some of the weirdest space operas.
Yes, the David Hasselhoff, Reb Brown.
Star Crash,
yes, yes.
Beyond the Battle of the Stars,
Space Mutiny.
Phoef enjoyed saying the word space. Say it one more time.
Space.
Yes.
Because the thing is that if you say space before anything, it becomes a part of the outer space experience.
That's
I'm
right.
talking into a space microphone and sitting on a space chair.
That's right.
But today we're going to do three little known, underappreciated film noirs.
Yeah.
Or is it films noir? I'm never quite sure of that.
I know. And, you know, it's interesting because when Phoef and I started discussing this, obviously, as you guys have figured out by now, we watch a ton of movies. And we love the genre of film/crime noir. And there are, of course, the very famous ones, but we made a list of about 20 obscure, kind of underrated, fallen through the cracks.
It's amazing that it was only a period of about 10 years.
Yeah, early 40s to the 50s.
But it was amazing how many of them they made.
Yep.
And into the 50s, and of course they've made them since then, but the height of the film noir period was from like 1945 to 1952.
Yeah. And of course the classics, Big Sleep, Gun Crazy, Kiss Me Deadly, Double Indemnity, all that. We love those films.
But there are so many good film noirs that are just not that well known.
Yeah, and it's funny. Phoef and I had lunch last week with a famous screenwriting team, and these guys really know their stuff. And we were very proud because when we mentioned the three titles that we were going to talk about, they didn't know them.
Yeah.
And that's when we realized this is great because if these guys, and they know their stuff, if they don't know them, then we're on the right path.
And if I could go into a little bit of history, the term film noir comes from a French publishing imprint called Série Noire, which meant black series, where they reprinted crime fiction from America. Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, Horace McCoy, W.R. Burnett, Chester Himes, Jim Thompson, and it became, there were paperbacks with black covers, and it became the name for that kind of story. And so when they started writing about the movies of that period, they called them film noir. And that phrase was not ever applied to them when they were being made. It applied to them critically long after they were over. At the time, they were just called crime pictures,
right?
And,
B-movies.
And some of them.
Were Bs.
So, and there are a lot of all sorts of definitions of what is a film noir and all that. And I don't really care about that. If it's got moody black and white photography and people are up to no good, I generally consider it a film noir.
Exactly. Yes. There's lots of cops. There's usually a private eye or two,
or maybe a femme fatale.
And boy, do we have a femme fatale for you, especially in the first one.
Yes,
Why don't we jump in? The first one we're going to talk about is from 1949, and it is called. Well, it had a couple titles, but it's called Too Late for Tears.
Or Killer Bait.
Yes, and then what was the German?
The German title was The Blonde Tiger. Blonde Tiger, which, by the way, is probably the best title, the most accurate title.
Yeah.
Too Late for Tears means nothing.
It sounds like a soap opera.
It has nothing to do with the story.
But I got to tell you, that's probably about the only problem with this movie is the title, because it packs a punch. We love this film. And tell them who wrote the screenplay.
Well, it was written by Roy Huggins. And if you haven't heard of
Yay.
Roy Huggins, he's one of the most influential writers of private eye stuff, particularly in television.
Yeah, well, he changed television.
But he wrote novels. He wrote a bunch of screenplays. He wrote the Fuller Brush Man with Red Skelton,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And other things. But then he went into television. And he wrote 77. He created 77 Sunset Strip, Maverick, The Fugitive, The Rockford Files.
Wow.
Among many other things. And he was just laid his mark on it. Matter of fact, there is a deal in television called the Huggins deal, which is he was the first writer who was credited with the series. He was the first created by writer, because when they did 77 Sunset Strip, the studio did a sneaky thing where they aired the second episode first, and Huggins didn't written that. And so they said, well, you didn't create the show. And so after that, he was so mad that from then on, when he did it, he got full credit for creating the shows.
Yeah, no, he was incredible. I mean, even if he had done nothing else but created The Fugitive, that would have been enough. But then, as with some of the other titles Phoef mentioned. Now, interestingly, Too Late for Tears, he originally wrote it as a Saturday Evening Post serial. So people couldn't wait till the next month for the next installment of this story. And it's just fantastic. And Lisbeth Scott is the femme fatale in this. And oh boy,
she is a real femme fatale.
She really is. Her character's name is Jane Palmer, and Jane Palmer. That's just it. This film should be more famous, and Jane Palmer should be more famous as a femme fatale character. And she's just this tough dame who's nothing but trouble. And you know what? We'll talk about the cast and everything, but let's get to our first clip, shall we?
Yeah.
Just through a bizarre chain of events, a young couple gets a suitcase full of money.
And by the way, the film just starts out. It just starts right out.
They're on
driving
Mulholland
along
Drive.
and somebody throws a suitcase full of money into their car.
Yes, they obviously were in the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time. But the point is, once the bag of money is in their lap, so to speak, she wants to keep it no matter what.
Hasn't it hit you yet, Alan? The money was literally thrown in our laps. No one in the world knows we have it.
Get a hold of yourself, Jane, will you? It's a bag of dynamite. That was a payoff, probably blackmail. We turn that bag over to the police, or
Don't stop, Alan. He's almost a block behind.
Well, they can keep running into trouble with that money from then on.
Yeah, the minute Jane Palmer sees that money, nothing is going to stop her. Now, interestingly, the voice of her husband there is Arthur Kennedy. Now, he's one of Phoef and I's favorite character actors, but, he started as a stage actor. He was a favorite of Arthur Miller. And this is an interesting thing, Phoef. The same year that he originated the role of Biff on stage in the original production of Death of a Salesman is the same year he made this movie.
Wow.
And in fact, Arthur Kennedy won the Tony Award for Best Supporting Actor in a Play. And but he's in so many terrific films: Elmer Gantry, Champion, Lawrence of Arabia.
Yes.
Some Came Running, and he's in one of my all-time favorite underrated kind of obscure films, that Western Nevada Smith.
Oh yeah.
And actually, Arthur Kennedy plays a bad guy in that, which is rather interesting. But we're just a big fan of his. So he's happily married to Jane Palmer, and but as we said, Lisbeth Scott now is just obsessed with keeping this bag of money.
You said you wanted to look at it, Alan. Look at it. 50s and 20s. There must be thousands here.
Yeah, probably 100,000. It's all money. The numbers are different.
You can make it work for us for the rest of our lives.
Stop it, Janie. If we don't report this, it's a felony. The same as stealing it. It's a blind alley with a big barred gate at the end.
That's right. That's right.
That's the other great thing about these noir films. They have dialogue just with great lines like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's a blind alley with a big bar gate at the end.
They're all. I imagine that began with Raymond Chandler, but it followed then on. Needless to say, someone else is looking for the money, and the someone else shows up, and it's Dan Jurier, and he was a great unsavory character actor. Always played villains. He was definitely the nicest guy in the world in real life. But he particularly is known for starring in James Stewart westerns. He was in Winchester 73, Night Passage, Ride Clear of Diablo. He was in Chicago Calling. He was in The Burglar. He's in a ton of pictures.
I love him in The Little Foxes. He kind of played the weak, sniveling brother in that.
Yeah. He generally was weak or sniveling or evil and sniveling.
And he's really good in this.
Oh yeah.
And so as Phoef said, you hear Arthur Kennedy. He's the moral compass of the story. He's like, gee, we should really turn this in. And she's like, no. So of course, one day there's a knock on the door, and she opens the door, and it's Dan Jurier, and he's claiming to be a cop. But he quickly just starts looking through the apartment, and things go kind of bad from there.
Where's my dough?
Then you're not a policeman.
Only on my mother's side, honey. Where's the dough?
Those things in the kitchen happen to belong to my sister-in-law. And I let you in because, well, housewives can get awfully bored sometimes. But believe me, I've no idea what you're talking about.
You're too smooth, honey. You're much too smooth. Where's the dough? Where's that money? What did you do with it?
We sent it to the police.
You're a liar. You would have told me that before now.
I was afraid to.
You should be. It was mine.
I guess the moral of the story is if a bag of money is thrown in your car, you probably should turn it over to the authorities.
I think the one of the things that is inherent in this kind of story is that the woman at her when she's attacked, when she's faced with a problem, immediately tries to seduce the guy.
Yes,
at least a little bit. At least a little bit.
Yeah, and of course, as you hear Elizabeth Scott's smoky voice, I mean, oh my God, she's perfectly cast in this. You know, she had about a decade where she worked all the time. She's in a lot of other great kind of obscure crime noirs. She actually only passed away, I think, in 2015. She lived to be like 93 years old, 92 years old. She's terrific in this.
And this movie, by the way, was recently restored. It had been fallen into public domain, I guess, and so there was a lot of bad copies. We saw a lot of really bad prints of it on YouTube with the title Killer Bait and with the title Too Late for Tears and all that. And the Film Noir Foundation, Eddie Miller and Alan K. Rohde, recently restored it. And I think they actually, it's interesting, they actually restored it complete, and then it was lost in the big fire that they had at the Universal a few years ago. And then they had to restore it again.
Yes.
So they really wanted to restore this movie.
But it's too late for tears. You just can't cry about that. Even when it goes up in a fire, it's just too late for tears. Now, here's the thing: is it's a very well respected film now. But when it was released, it did not do well at the box office.
No.
And unfortunately, because when the film opens, it says Hunt, which is such a great name, Hunt Stromberg presents, and this guy was a big producer. He'd been a very successful producer with MGM. He had produced the Thin Man franchise, all the Jeanette MacDonald, Nelson Eddy pictures, but he left MGM. He formed his own indie production company. But after TLFT, by the way, that's what the cool kids are calling it, Phoef. I think it's even hashtag TLFT instead of Too Late for Tears. But after the film did not perform well financially, Stromberg retired. So this was literally the last film he ever produced.
And it was generally considered to be, I think she herself considered to be Elizabeth Scott's best performance.
Yes.
And now it is considered to be that. But it's only recently been reevaluated and rediscovered, and she just barely lived to see it.
And it's very nicely directed.
Yes, by Byron Haskin, who had a really weird career.
We love some of his movies.
I mean, he did everything.
Robinson Crusoe on Mars.
Right.
He did the Robert Newton 1950 Treasure Island, which is wonderful.
The War of the Worlds with the Gene Barry, George Powell.
Naked Jungle.
The Conquest of Space. He was one of the primary people behind the Outer Limits TV series. He directed 6 episodes of it, including the Architects of Fear, and Demon with the Glass Hand.
Demon with the Glass
which are
Hand
probably
is my favorite Outer Limits
the best episodes.
Yeah.
But he also oversaw all the special effects for the series, and he was the director of the original pilot for Star Trek, The Cage.
So he just had a fascinating, eclectic career. He does a great job directing this film, and so actually we're gonna go back in for a minute. So again, Arthur Kennedy, love is blind, isn't it? Because he still thinks he can reason with Jane, and here one more time, he's just trying to get her to maybe agree to give up the money.
Jane, what's happening to us? What's happening? The money sits down there in an old leather bag, and yet it's tearing us apart. It's poison, Jane. It's changing you. It's changing both of us.
I wish it were that simple, Alan. But I haven't changed. It's the way I am. You've got to let me keep that money.
Don't, Jane.
No, Alan. I won't let you just give it away. Chances like this are never offered twice. This is it. I've been waiting for it, dreaming of it all my life, even when I was a kid. And it wasn't because we were poor. Not hungry poor, at least. I suppose, in a way, it was far worse. We were white-collar poor, middle-class poor, the kind of people who can't quite keep up with the Joneses and die a little every day because they can't. That's why I married Blanchard. I married the first man who asked me because I thought he had money.
Wow. That's very interesting because this is now post-World War II. The country's doing well, economically, and that'd actually be very interesting to try and track that down of when the first Keeping Up with the Joneses was said. But that had a lot to do with it. People could buy cars now, but oh my God, my neighbor's car is nicer than our car.
And there's something about somebody who always wants more, no matter how much they have.
Yes.
And in general, the film noir generally applies that sort of thinking to the female, and some people have problems with that, I suppose. But it's a very human thing, and it's a very natural thing. It's just taken to an extreme of psychopathic narcissism.
Yeah, and I also kind of think of a lot of these crime noirs as equal opportunity employers, because instead of just having a sniveling woman just going, "Oh no, what shall we do?"
That's very true because they were the strong women.
Absolutely,
they were strong women. When they knew what they wanted, they went after it. You could interpret them all sort of in a reverse fashion, where the men are the bad guys, and the women are trying to get ahead, trying to achieve something.
They
with
certainly
life.
are driving the bus.
Yes.
They're so busy. That's why the postman had to ring twice.
That's right.
But so obviously, we highly recommend this film. We're not going to give away any more spoilers. But let me just tell you that after a while, Dan Duryea realizes how dangerous Jane Palmer is.
He thought he was the dangerous one. He thought he could come in and bully her. But no.
Yeah, and so at one point, she thinks everything's going great, and she shows up at his apartment ready to seduce him, fool him, as long as the plan continues that she's going to get that money.
I don't get it.
The money's in that bag, Danny. We're leaving for Mexico with it.
Like I say, I don't get it. Why we?
I need you. A woman traveling alone would attract too much attention. And I've got to know about that money. Where it came from.
That's better. Don't ever change, Tiger. I don't think I'd like you with a heart.
Well, needless to say, it doesn't end well.
No,
but we won't spoil it for you.
Yeah, but so again, 1949's Too Late for Tears, aka Killer Bait, which is a pretty good title.
Yeah.
And in Germany, aka Blonde Tiger.
Yes, which is also a good title, and it's been re-released on DVD recently.
Yes.
I'm afraid I don't know the label, but it's out there.
Yes.
Get it, watch it. It's a really good movie.
And by the way, the reason I guess in Germany they called it Blonde Tiger is Dan Duryea calls Elizabeth Scott's character Tiger about 75 times. So after about the 70th time, we're saying, you know what? He deserves to die.
Yes, if we were to do a drinking game, with the number of times he calls her Tiger, you'd be passed out on the floor.
You need to go to the emergency room.
Yes.
Well, let's move on to our next.
Our next film is a film called Armored Car Robbery.
Really?
1950. Yes.
What's it about?
Armored Car Robbery. It's about an armored car robbery. And that's actually one of the cool things about this movie, because most film noirs have what we call interchangeable titles. I mean, Too Late for Tears could be any number of. Follow Me Quietly. They're names like Impact, Incident, Jigsaw,
Detour,
Scene of the Crime, The Setup, Shockproof, Tension, The Threat, Trapped, City Across the River, The Dark City, Mystery Street, Quicksand, Walk Softly Stranger, Where Danger Lives. They could have switched those titles around and it would have made no difference.
He has about 70 more titles.
But Armored Car Robbery is very clearly about an armored car robbery, and that's good. Now, I guess it technically is a question about whether or not it really is a film noir, since it's also what they call kind of a police procedural. But there is enough of emphasis on the bad guys that it qualifies, I think, as a film noir.
Oh, absolutely. It has scenes, even though it's 1950, it has scenes in it, and we'll get to some of those, that Quentin Tarantino wishes he had written.
And matter of fact, he did.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
But it's directed by the eclectic Richard Fleischer.
Richard Fleischer, who is one of the great directors of all time, who's the son and nephew of the founders of the Fleischer Animation Studio, who did all the
Betty
Boop and Coco the Clown and the Gulliver's Travels
and
feature.
the early black and white Popeyes
and the early Superman.
Yes,
cartoons.
they're beautiful.
Yeah,
they're
beautiful. He was a stunning guy, and his son, went to Harvard, I think, and became a big director. And,
I devoured his autobiography, Just Tell Me When to Cry, which I highly recommend. But this guy directed everything from like these kind of early crime films on his credit list to Soylent Green, to Compulsion,
to Fantastic Voyage,
and in fact,
the New Centurion,
and I love Mr. Majestic, which is one of my favorite Charles Bronson films. So this guy, he almost it's like he literally made a good film in every genre there is.
Yes, and he went to Yale School of Drama. He started directing short live action films, and then he made a number of film noirs first. Called one of them was Follow Me Quietly. Mm-hmm. The other one was The Narrow Margin, which is one of the, I think, 10 best film noirs there are. And but he also directed some flops.
Yeah, sure.
He directed The Jazz Singer with Neil Diamond.
Yeah.
He directed the famous, oddly disturbing movie Mandingo.
Yeah.
And he directed the Dr. Dolittle musical. So,
well, he tried. I mean, Rex Harrison was so 3 sheets to the wind.
But overall, I think he's a criminally underrated director, and he's very ripe for discovery.
Well, in fact, he directed what we feel is one of the best serial killer movies ever made, 10 Rillington Place, with Richard Attenborough and John Hurt.
And these, also he directed 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Disney movie. I mean, the fact that the same person directed 10 Rillington Place and directed 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, directors don't work that way anymore. They don't straddle genres.
No. In fact, from reading his autobiography, there's a great moment when, so he realizes Walt Disney himself is offering a Fleischer a job. Now, of course, growing up in the Fleischer household with his father and his uncle being these, talented animators, but they were always in the shadow of the great, powerful Walt Disney machine. And so Richard Fleischer calls up his father and says, listen, Dad, I have a chance to work for Walt Disney. What do you think? And his dad said, take him for every dime you can, and hung up the phone. So, and I guess he got a good deal out of that. And but Disney actually loved Richard Fleischer and working with him. But so as Phoef was saying, the title's very straightforward, and some might find the movie a little straightforward, but it is just so great because it's kind of the slow and meticulous planning of a big-time armored car robbery.
It's a heist film.
Yes.
It's one of the early heist films.
And in the very beginning, there's they're just trying to gather the crew together.
Hello, Dave.
I figured I'd find you here. I thought you told me that you were all washed up with this thing.
Ah, it's the other way around.
And what do you hang around for?
Look, Dave, I know she's strictly high rent and I'm broke, but I can't forget her that easy.
You really got it bad, haven't you?
Yeah, bad. I loved her enough to marry her. I still do. You blame me?
I suppose some guys might go for her.
Some guy did behind my back. I don't know who the creep is, but I'd sure like to lay my hands on him.
Yeah, I know. You better lay your hands on some money first. That'll take care of some of your problems anyway.
That'll take care of all of my problems.
Come on, I want to talk to you.
So, needless to say, that was in a burlesque house where one of the two bad guys is married to the stripper, who is
Yes.
Also carrying on with the other of them. So, I mean, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, but that's literally the criminal version of, hey, guys, let's get the band back together.
One of the weird things about this movie is that right off the bat, it's in L.A. It's clearly L.A. They say it's L.A. They say it's L.A. a lot. And they're going to rob an armored car that's pulling out of Wrigley Field.
Yes.
And at first, when I watched that, I thought, what is this? Is this some sort of alternate history, you know, a different timeline of fact? But there was indeed a Wrigley Field in Los Angeles, in South Los Angeles, built in 1925 by the same William Wrigley who built the Wrigley Field in Chicago, which was then called Cubs Field. And it was in South Los Angeles. It was at 425 East 42nd Place, if you want to look at it, but it's long gone now. It was built as a replica of the Chicago one. So it looked just like the Chicago one. It was the home of Los Angeles Angels, which was the Pacific Coast League team.
Like a minor league team at that point.
Not connected to the, no connection to the current Angels. But they made it their home there, and they went in the end when the new American League expansion team owned by Gene Autry, the Los Angeles Angels did play there for a brief period of time. The ones that are now,
because it was torn down in the late '60s.
Yeah,
right?
It was torn down in 1969.
Yeah.
Then they became the California Angels. They moved to Anaheim, and they became the Anaheim Angels.
Yeah.
And now they're the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim.
Yeah.
And but there was a Wrigley Field right there in downtown LA.
This movie is 10 times more enjoyable than watching the Angels play. But no, it's funny because we when we had this lunch last week, we were talking to these two guys, and they were natives of California. They were born and raised here, and they thought Phoef was crazy when he was talking about Wrigley Field. They had no idea. And I had, you know, when we were watching the movie the first time, I went, wait a minute, what? So it's actually great that on film in this movie, there's lots of footage of it on the exteriors.
And there was also lots of footage of Los Angeles in general.
Yes.
It's a great travel log of Los Angeles in 1950.
Yeah. And as Phoef was saying, this film also does something that nowadays is done a lot, but for its time, you spend a lot of time with the criminals. They're planning this big heist. And then you also then meet the police officers, and you spend a lot of time with the cops who are trying to solve this case also.
Yes, and of course, one of the cops' partners was killed in the robbery, so this time it's personal.
Well, that's the interesting thing, too, is the robbery, instead of like them planning it, and then the robbery might happen near the end or the latter part of the film, it happens right away.
Yes, and it's about the aftermath.
Yes,
of it, and them being tracked down, and basically everything going wrong.
And what Phoef and I really found entertaining is in our very next clip, as Phoef said, the robbery happened, a police officer was killed, and in fact, the lead investigator, who's played by Charles McGraw, and we'll talk about him, but Charles McGraw's partner is killed. And in this scene, the insurance company adjuster shows up, and it's nice to see that insurance companies have always been the same.
My name is Bronson. I represent Pacific States Insurance Company. I looked for you over at headquarters, but they told me I could find you down here.
What's on your mind, Mr. Bronson?
Well, you see, my firm has the policy on the L.A. Armored Car Company, and we stand to take a big loss.
You're worried about your money, is that it?
That's it exactly. If they collect their insurance, it'll be the biggest claim that my company has ever had to pay.
You know, that's quite a coincidence. A friend of mine, a police officer, he had insurance, too. His widow is going to collect it.
I heard about that. I'm sorry. But as I was saying, my company stands to put out over $400,000. So you see, we're more than anxious to cooperate. Isn't there something that we can do?
Yeah, come to think of it, there is something you can do.
Really? What is it?
Get out of our hair and let us work. We're doing everything we can.
That was, of course, the legendary Charles McGraw,
Yelling at the insurance guy. Yeah, he's the main cop.
who was one of the best character actors of film noir, and he started off by playing bad guys. He was particularly memorable as one of the hitmen with William Conrad in The Killers.
Yes. But what's great is Fleischer obviously liked him because 2 years later he's in Narrow Margin.
He did this movie, Narrow Margin, and Roadblock.
Yes.
And he just was. He seemed like he was a natural leading man, but then he never really made it as a star.
No.
But he became a great supporting actor. He was incredibly great in Spartacus.
As Kirk Douglas's main gladiator trainer, I believe.
Yes, I remember him painting the marks on Woody Strode's body and all that. And he was in A Boy and His Dog.
Yeah, he plays Preacher in that great sci-fi cult classic. We love that film. Now, tragically,
he had a very memorable death.
Yeah, the poor guy was only 66 years old.
He fell through
the glass shower door. He was taking a shower. He slips, falls through the glass shower door, and severed an artery.
And died.
And bled to death.
Bled to death. And because of that, that's why you have safety glass in your shower doors, in case you're wondering.
Yes.
Because of that incident.
Yes. So listeners, and also just remember that's why those safety bars are there to grab onto.
That's true. But it's a very sad thing. But and he was in tons of television playing, usually generals.
Oh yeah. In fact, the fact that he died at the age of 66 and had like 170 credits is pretty amazing. The guy worked all the time. And by the way, in Armored Car Robbery, Charles McGraw wears the classic police detective trench coat.
Yes.
He looks like McGruff, the crime dog.
He does. I believe McGruff was modeled after, I'm not kidding, was modeled after Charles McGraw. I really think he was.
But then, so as Phoef and I were saying, right away, the heist happens. Things go a little badly. Charles McGraw's partner ends up getting killed, and one of the crew of the heist gang,
the husband of the stripper, by the way,
yes, he gets gut shot.
Right.
And so, as Phoef and I were hinting to a little bit earlier, here's a little Reservoir Dogs all the way back into 1950.
He's worse, Purvis. He needs a doc.
I don't care if he needs a hospital. All he's going to get is first aid. Let's get out of here.
Dave, listen to me. I can't go with you like this. You've got to get me a doc.
I told you that was out. Forget about it. We'll get you patched up later. Get him a slug of whiskey. We're wasting time.
Here, Benny, have a drink of this. Now, talk to Dave. Make him get me a doc. Yeah, I will. Make him. You take it easy. I'll be back. I don't think he's going to pull through, Purvis.
Well, that's his tough luck. He knew the chance he was taking. We've stalled long enough. We could have been halfway to Mexico and out of trouble if it hadn't been for him.
Well, I don't vote.
Will you quit holding a wait for the guy? If he kicks off, we'll bury him at sea. You can do your moaning then.
Don't move. Any of you. I want to get me a doc. Don't try to stop me, Dave.
Tim Roth thought he had it bad.
That was, by the way, Douglas Fowley playing the guy who was gut shot, who was probably best remembered as the director of Singing in the Rain, the frustrated movie director in Singing in the Rain. Yes. But I know him as I'm sorry to all you fans of Val Kilmer out there, but I know him as the best Doc Holliday ever in the
great.
TV series The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp. I don't care whether you go for Dennis Quaid or Cesar Romero or Stacy Keach or Jason Robards or Kirk Douglas or Victor Mature. Douglas Fowley was the best.
And he's great in this
Doc
movie.
Holliday. Yes, he's great. But the leader of the gang...
who seemed to not have much sympathy.
For it was William Tallman. Oh. William Tallman was one of the finest character actors around. He was, of course, the maniac in The Hitchhiker, Ida Lupino movie. And of course, he's most famous for playing Hamilton Berger for
He lost a lot of
million
cases.
years in Perry Mason.
Yes.
He lost a lot of cases. As a matter of fact, he lost his job in 1960 because he was arrested at a nude, quote-unquote, nude pot party in Beverly Hills for possession of marijuana and lewd vagrancy.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
he said he just stopped by for a social drink when the police came in and found him naked. Everybody was naked at this pop party. So they fired him from the show. And the case was thrown out because the presiding judge proclaimed that, quote, it isn't against the law to go around a house without clothes on.
Make America great again.
But CBS refused to rehire him. But then there was a letter writing campaign.
Bring back Hamilton Burger.
Bring back Hamilton Burger. And Gail Patrick Jackson rehired him.
Yay.
And so there's a happy ending to that. There's not a happy ending to his life. However, he died of cancer. But he did one of the first really memorable anti-smoking commercials because it aired after his death.
Yes.
And he was on there. He came on there and he said, before I die, I want to do what I can to leave the world free of cancer for my 6 children. It was really, really moving because you were watching this dead person.
But it was an
telling you not to
extraordinary
smoke.
thing that he did because many actors were terrified of angering the tobacco industry.
Yes.
And so because the poor guy knew he was terminal, as Phoef said, if it's not the first, it's one of the first anti-smoking PSAs. And he said, if I could just convince one person to either not take up smoking or quit smoking, then it's worth it. And by the way, Phoef, I found it on YouTube. So you can find it on YouTube.
Yeah.
His name was William Tallman, Talman. Look it up. It's incredibly powerful because, as Phoef said, when he made it, he knew that he was dying. And in fact, he died 6 weeks after filming the PSA. And the guy had 6 kids. But he is terrific as the crime boss in this film.
He's just without any moral, he's just a machine. He's just an evil, evil machine.
And the other good thing that we really love when we watch these older crime films is you can sometimes learn the level of like what CSI was back in 1950.
Yes.
So this next clip is the cops and Charles McGraw hanging around the lab and hoping that the scientist and the police lab can help them with some clues.
So this is Forensics 1950.
Yes.
Man who wore this stuff is about 5 feet 10 or 11 inches tall, blonde curly hair, weighs around 175 pounds, wears a size 9C shoe. Pretty good dresser. Doesn't mind putting out for shirts and socks at any rate.
What about this lipstick smear?
From its grease content, it looks like a theatrical brand. There are only a few makes. I'll try to identify the manufacturer. Marshall speaking. Yes, he's here. For you, Lieutenant.
Thanks.
This Cordell. We hit pay dirt, Lieutenant. The gal in question is Yvonne Ledoux, a burlicue queen working out of the Bijou Theater. But that's not all. She's also the widow of the late Benny McBride.
Benny's wife, huh?
Yeah, you should see her in her working clothes. Imagine a dish like this married to a mug like Benny McBride. The naked and the dead. Very funny.
The guy who said the naked and the dead,
the cop who called in with the info about the burlesque dancer.
Charles McGraw's young partner that Charles McGraw doesn't accept until the very end, of course, grudgingly, was played by Don McGuire. And he had a very interesting career.
Yeah.
You look at him and you think, well, he looks vaguely familiar, but he started out as an actor.
Played sidekicks a lot.
He was in Meet Danny Wilson, all that.
Yeah.
But then he became a writer. He wrote Bad Day at Black Rock, which
Great
is
movie.
not a bad thing. He became a director. He directed The Delicate Delinquent with Jerry Lewis. But his last credit was he wrote a play in the early 70s, I think, called Would I Lie to You, about a male actor who starts cross-dressing to get parts. And that's right, it became Tootsie.
Yes.
So
he has
Don
an on-screen credit.
Is on McGuire. He was nominated for an Oscar. He basically was the guy who came up with the idea for Tootsie.
Yes.
So
that's amazing. Oh, and by the way, it's 6 degrees separation from Roy Huggins. We mentioned Roy Huggins, who wrote Too Late for Tears, Roy Huggins wrote The Fuller Brush Man, and Don McGuire is the second lead in The Fuller Brush Man. So thank you, Roy Huggins. You're never too far away.
I have to talk about the writers of this movie.
Please do.
Earl Felton and Gerald Drayson Adams. But Earl Felton, very, very interesting guy. He was Fleischer's favorite screenwriter. He wrote The Narrow Margin.
Oh.
He wrote The Vegas Story. He wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He was crippled from polio, and so he didn't have the use of his legs. But he didn't use a wheelchair. He used a crutch and a cane.
Wow.
And he used to beat people who tried to help him to try to help him walk, because he was very angry about it.
Very independent.
And yes. And he talked about his childhood when his mother took him to revival meetings in search of a cure for his polio. And he said, dragging myself up to the pulpit was embarrassing enough. It was crawling back down the aisle that was so humiliating.
Oh, my
When
goodness.
he didn't get cured, of course. But that's really nothing compared to what happened to him later in life. He was allegedly a participant in the notorious Profumo affair.
Oh, my goodness.
John Profumo was a 1960.
Yes.
He was a British member of the government. He was the Secretary for State of War under Harold Macmillan, and he got involved in this big scandal because he was sleeping with a prostitute named Christine Keeler. And this was enough of a scandal in 1960 and 1961 to basically bring down Macmillan's government.
Yeah. They've made a few movies about the scandal.
Yeah.
I think one was called Scandal, in fact.
Yes. But Earl Felton was supposedly working for the CIA then. And he took part in orgies that Stephen Ward threw and that John Profumo was at, all that sort of thing, and gave confidential information that Keeler claimed that Stephen Ward, who was the main pimp in English circles at the time, gave confidential information to Felton that he got from a Russian guy who was also at the orgies.
Felton said the most humiliating part was when he had to drag himself away from the orgies.
Well, I can't figure out how. I mean, I gotta give this guy credit. He's got.
That's amazing.
I don't know.
That's amazing.
He can't walk, but he goes to orgies for his country.
But when you read his screen credits, it's very impressive. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yes. But we have to pay the bills.
Well, we do have to pay the bills, but we also, we're gonna say goodbye to Armored Car Robbery, but we have one more clip.
Oh, that's right.
That's all right, from Armored Car Robbery, and this is just a nice little short clip, but there's nothing better in these crime films when they finally catch one of the other criminals, put literally the bright light over their head, and are interrogating them while they're covered in sweat.
The penalty in this state for murder is death. When you kill a cop, they cut a few corners to see that you get there in a hurry.
How many times I have to tell you I didn't kill anybody?
This cop that was killed was knee-deep in friends. Just so happens I was one of his best. I made myself a promise. I'd go all out to see that the murderer got paid off.
He mentions the death penalty. That's the other good thing about these movies in the 40s and 50s. It was always the threat of either the gas chamber or the chair.
Yes. Drop the pellet on you. Yeah.
That's right. Or turn the handle, turn the switch. But Phoef mentioned, and it's very, very true, we do have to pay the bills, and we are so happy and proud that Final Draft is the sponsor for Film Freaks Forever.
I actually use Final Draft, and I've used it for years.
We both do, and Final Draft has been the #1 selling screenwriting application in the world for over 25 years. Final Draft automatically formats scripts to industry standards, allowing writers to do what they do best: tell stories. Final Draft is the professional's choice and the industry standard, and everyone from Oscar winners like James Cameron to Aaron Sorkin use it. And the newest release, Final Draft 10, offers great new features like the beat board and story map that helps you build your story from the ground up. Final Draft also offers reader and writer apps for iPhone and iPad, making creativity truly portable. Final Draft is happy to offer 30% off to listeners of this podcast. So just go to www.finaldraft.com and use the code WBPodcast at checkout.
And we wrote, by the way, I think, or correct me if I'm wrong, we wrote the entire series of Thanks on Final Draft, did we not?
We absolutely did.
Which is our cult television series about the Pilgrims, comedy series about the Pilgrims.
It stars Cloris Leachman. It was such an honor to work with her. But yes, so we were so happy. When Final Draft, when we found out that the sponsor for Film Freaks Forever was going to be Final Draft, we were as happy as Elizabeth Scott when that bag of money fell in her lap.
Except there wasn't quite as much money, but it was good. It was good.
But we were as happy as that.
Yes, we were as happy as that. We were almost as happy as William Tallman when that armored car pulled up to Wrigley Field. Yes.
And we were almost as happy as the next group of criminals and their master plan in our final undiscovered crime noir gem that we're going to discuss. Our final one is called The Lineup. And this one was made in 1958.
So we're jumping ahead in time a little bit.
Yes, because Too Late for Tears was 1949. Armored Car Robbery was 1950. Now we're going to 1958. This film is still black and white. It is beautiful. We love this film. And Phoef knows a lot about the writer. It was written by Sterling Siliphant.
Sterling Siliphant, who was one of the he wrote everything. I mean,
Yes.
in the 60s, 70s, 80s, he wrote everything. He wrote, of course, he was mostly known for writing Route 66 on television.
Yeah, well, he created Route 66 and The Naked City.
And The Naked City.
But his Oscar winner is for The Heat of the Night.
In The Heat of the Night. And but then he went on to write, disaster movies.
Yeah,
He wrote
Poseidon
Adventure and Towering Inferno. And every kind of movie, both good and bad. But basically, he was just a great writer of every kind of story.
Actually, he worked with Richard Fleischer because Fleischer directed The New Centurions and Siliphant wrote the screenplay. It was based on the famous Joseph Wambaugh novel. And actually, Siliphant wrote one of my favorite 70s crime films, Killer Elite.
Yes.
So the guy had just
there's a chance
weird, eclectic
that
credits.
If it's a movie in the 70s, there's chances are that Sterling Siliphant wrote it. If
Yes.
any movie.
And that's what's so amazing is his script for The Lineup is superb. Now, this is odd. Phoef and I know our TV series, and we know about shows that were on the air even before we were born, because we were talking about shows like, Route 66 and The Naked City. Well, as we've done our going down the rabbit holes, we feel that we've watched every cop series that had like a long run, but we had never heard of this cop show,
Which was called The Lineup.
It was a CBS series, and it ran from 1954 to 1960. And it was called The Lineup. Now, once it was syndicated, it sometimes ran under the title San Francisco Beat. But even before it was a hit series, it was a hit radio show that ran from 1950 to 1953.
And it was sort of a San Francisco version of Dragnet.
Yeah, and but again, we still don't understand how it kind of slipped under our radar because there are 190 episodes of this sucker. But so I think near the end of its run, it was kind of running out of gas. And for some reason, though, in 1958, so it only had like 2 more years to run as a series, but in 1958, they did this movie version of it. And 2 of the cops from the TV series are in the movie, but one of the best cop characters in the movie, played by Emil Meyer, and we'll get into him later, he plays Lieutenant Quine in this. He's not in the TV series. I guess they felt they wanted to, shake things up a little bit. But the best thing about the film is not the cops. The best thing about this film is the villains, the criminals.
These 2 hitmen that, again, Quentin Tarantino must have seen this movie because all the sort of inter-byplay that John Travolta and Samuel Jackson have in Pulp Fiction, its antecedent is Robert Keith and Eli Wallach.
Yeah.
In The Lineup.
It's funny. The movie poster taglines when the lineup was released as a feature film in 1958. They were acknowledging that it was based on the TV series. So some of the movie poster taglines were too hot, too big for TV. And the other one was the manhunt they had to put on the giant-sized movie theater screen.
Giant size.
Which is fantastic. Now, the other really interesting thing about this film, and there are a lot of interesting things about it, but it was directed by Don Siegel.
Who had a remarkable career.
A remarkable career. And the guy had already directed a lot of movies. This was his 15th feature film. But even before he became a director, he met the famous producer Hal Wallace when he was young, and Don Siegel got a job in the library, in the film library at Warner Brothers, and he quickly rose through the ranks there, and he was promoted to the head of the montage department.
So when you would cut into a movie and they would do a montage of headlines,
or a guy getting through the jail system, whatever, any kind of montage. Don Siegel directed thousands of them, including, famously,
the opening of Casablanca.
Yes.
He directed the opening of Casablanca.
Yeah. And so people at Warner Brothers started to notice this guy's really good with visuals. But here's the other interesting thing about Don Siegel. In 1945, he directed 2 film shorts back to back, and they both won Academy Awards. He won 2 Academy Awards for directing best film shorts.
Back to back. I don't think anybody has done that since.
No, and so they finally said, you know what, we think you're ready to direct a feature film. And his very first feature film was called The Verdict in 1946.
It's a terrific murder mystery with Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre. And if you haven't seen it, it's one of the best whodunit endings of any movie.
But I just love that the first time he gets to direct a film, Sidney Greenstreet and Peter Lorre are in it with him. And so the other interesting thing about Don Siegel is he was also famous for helping people. If he met somebody who was young and upcoming and he thought they had talent, Sam Peckinpah would not have a career without Don Siegel. Don Siegel and him became fast friends, and Siegel insisted on Peckinpah getting jobs on some of his early films. And so 2 years before Don Siegel makes the lineup, Don Siegel directs the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Which is a legendary science
Legendary.
movie.
And in the opening credits, it says dialogue coach Sam Peckinpah.
Yeah.
So Sam Peckinpah was the dialogue coach.
I think he's in it too, playing a cop or something.
Right.
I think.
So Sam Peckinpah was a dialogue coach on 4 of Siegel's early films, and that's just amazing. And of course, Don Siegel then down the line meets Clint Eastwood, and Clint Eastwood loves Don Siegel, and he directed, I think, 5 Clint Eastwood movies,
including Dirty Harry.
Yes, and the Enforcer, I think, and then actually he directed John Wayne's final film, the terrific Western, The Shootist.
Yeah.
So he just had an amazing career.
I mean, I was aware of him as a kid from the Clint Eastwood movies, but it wasn't until later that I realized how far back his career went.
Oh.
And obviously Clint Eastwood credited him for a lot of learning how to direct.
Yes, absolutely. And Phoef mentioned the criminals, and the other kind of interesting thing about the plot of this film, because it's 1958, is the criminals are dealing in narcotics.
Heroin.
Yes. And so in our first clip, the police have found some of the contraband that was left behind by the criminals, and they're in the lab, again, police lab. It's 1958. It's 8 years later. But let's listen to them tell us what this narcotic just might be.
I'm sure it's heroin. Give it the Marquis reagent test.
All right.
If that's the pure stuff, there's enough in there to fix every addict in San Francisco for the next 2 weeks.
And after it's cut, it'll be worth over $100,000.
What was it Dressler said? Just a few knickknacks? We'll get him in here fast.
Now, $100,000 in 1958 is worth pretty much $1 million nowadays. So that's a lot of money. So as he said, it's heroin, or as we like to call it, smack, horse, skag, H, dope, snowball, China white, dragon, white nurse, black tar, Mexican mud, skunk, and scat. These are just some of the various slang that was being thrown around in the late 50s, early 60s. Now, you know, it's funny. We were talking about the TV show and also the movie being called The Lineup, and it earned its title because almost every episode featured a police lineup, and they use that in this film, too. And when they're visually showing the lineup, you can't help but think of the film The Usual Suspects.
Yes, yes.
Because I swear to God, one of the guys even looks like Benicio del Toro.
I know. And you wonder, I mean, there are a lot of movies that have lineups still, but I wonder, you know, whether Christopher McQuarrie saw that.
Yeah, and the other thing, like when we were talking about these great exterior shots of Los Angeles in 1950 from Armored Car Robbery, people who love the Bay Area and San Francisco, that's another treat in this film.
Yeah,
Much of the film, in fact, I would think probably like 60 to 70% of the movie is shot out in the streets.
Yeah, it's all on location. It's
so
all really
there
there.
are exterior and interior shots of San Francisco and the Bay Area. And what's sad, of course, is that a lot of these places that are featured in the movie, well, they're not even there anymore.
Right.
And so it just has stunning footage of San Francisco. And, you know, it's funny, one of the cops who talked briefly there, like, well, we'll get him in here fast. That's Emil Meyer. And he was one of my favorite character actors. This guy played everything from the priest in Paths of Glory to the dirty cop in Sweet Smell of Success. And he just had the face of a cop, and he's just one of our favorite guys in this movie, too. And actually, aside from the villains, the movie has just a bunch of great character actors in it. In fact, one of the nervous witnesses is Raymond Bailey, and he would go on to play Mr. Drysdale in over 245 episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies.
I like to think that Mr. Drysdale was mixed up in heroin dealing. I like to think that.
in the bank?
The whole series kind of makes sense then when you think about it that way.
But so, you know, as this gang of criminals are trying to make sure that everything's taken care of with this huge heroin shipment, which, by the way, they hid in dolls, which we find fascinating. We're going to go to our next clip just so you can hear the banter between the criminals. As Phoef mentioned, the great character actor Robert Keith and Eli Wallach are the two main criminals. They've hired a new wheelman who is played by Richard Jekyll, and we'll talk about him also. But in this next clip, you'll hear how particular Eli Wallach is about everything.
I don't like the car. I like my wheels stored in a prepared drop. I like them kept under cover till I'm ready. I want my plates snatched not more than 1 hour before I move.
Return it. It's too new. Look, you don't get it. You see, I rented this car with a fake set of credit cards, a phony driver's license. And I fix it up all by myself so nobody's gonna catch us. Because she's so souped up, nobody can catch us.
Maybe the clerk will remember you.
Nah, chance in 1,000.
It's one chance too many.
Oh man, that dialogue, Sterling Silliphant, right?
Yes. Well, I often think that when you're writing something, you often get, you know, go off in a different direction because characters interest you. And you can almost feel this movie because it starts out as a police procedural. And for the first, 15, 20 minutes of it, it's just about the cops. And then these three guys come into it. And the movie just totally focuses on them. It just runs away. They just run away with the movie.
Yeah. And, you know, Eli Wallach there, this is kind of interesting, too, because even though it's 1958, this is very early in Wallach's film career. You know, he grew up in Red Hook, a section of Brooklyn. But yeah, by the way, you know, this guy had like 180 credits. He had a very long career. He was born
just died.
Yeah, he was born in 1915, and he didn't pass away till 2014. So he was 98 years old. But here's the interesting thing, and you could even hear it in his voice all the time. You know, he was from Brooklyn. He was from Red Hook, Brooklyn. Somehow he ended up, though, going to college at the University of Texas in Austin. And that's where he really started to do plays and do theater. And in almost every play he did at the University of Texas in Austin, on stage with him was his classmate, Walter Cronkite. And I just love that Walter Cronkite and Eli Wallach were doing plays together at the University of Texas in Austin.
You just want to be able to sit him down and say, hey, This is where you will be in the future.
Yes. And like, you're going to be in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and play the ugly. And I'm going to become one of the greatest newscasters of all time. But so Wallach, after college, he moves back to New York. He started studying with Sanford Meisner. Then he gets drafted for World War II. He serves in the Army. He comes back. He's one of the founding members of the Actors Studio, and he becomes one of the greatest stage actors of his generation. He starred in the original production of The Rose Tattoo, and after that,
he won a Tony.
Yes, and after that, Tennessee Williams just loved him and would want to use him all the time. Eli Wallach was in the Broadway play of Ionesco's Rhinoceros with Zero Mostel. He was one of the sailors in Mr. Roberts. He was in a famous revival of Major Barbara. But because Tennessee Williams liked him, Tennessee Williams insists that Eli Wallach gets cast in Baby Doll. And that's Wallach's first film, 1956.
Yeah, it's not often that a first performance is that striking.
Yeah, and he's 41 years old at this period. He did not start his film career till he was 41. So that means that he's about 44, 45 years old here in the lineup. And of course, once he started working in film and television, he never stopped. I mean, he's in The Magnificent Seven. As we said, he is the ugly in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He is so good in The Misfits. And, it's funny. When I was a kid, this odd little film happened to be on late night TV. He's in a movie with his wife, Ann Jackson, who's a terrific actress, too. And they were married their whole lives. But he's in a movie called The Tiger Makes Out.
The Tiger Makes Out.
Which was in 1967. And it's just this odd, strange little film. But I guess I saw it when I was like 13, and I just loved it. But of course, Eli Wallach is in one of the greatest TV movies ever made, A Cold Night's Death.
With Robert Culp.
Yes, made in 1973. Yeah. And I'll tell you something, folks. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and get it. And in fact, probably down the line, Phoef and I have discussed making a podcast of just our favorite 70s TV movies, and that would be right up there.
It's a undiscovered, unmined gem.
And so we're going to go back into another clip here just to show the banter, again, between this gang of criminals.
I knew a guy like him once.
No, you didn't. There's never been a guy like Dancer. He's a wonderful, pure, pathological study. A psychopath with no inhibition.
I love that Eli Wallach's name is Dancer. That's such a great name for a killer.
It really is.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe his last movie was Ghostwriter, right? By the Roman Polanski film with...
You mean Eli Wallach?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I think so.
But I mean, he worked right up until he died.
Yes, absolutely. But so that really great, deep, resonant voice there when he said a psychopath with no inhibitions, that's the other a main criminal in this film, and that is played by Robert Keith.
Who you might not know the name,
but just
but
a
you know
solid,
the face,
dependable
you know the voice.
Character actor. The guy was amazing. In fact, he originated the role of Doc in the Broadway hit Mr. Roberts. So him and Wallach had actually worked together. Now, William Powell, of course, played Doc in the famous movie version of Mr. Roberts. But also, Robert Keith was in the original Broadway cast of Lillian Hellman's The Children's Hour. So he was an amazing stage actor. And then once he started working in film and television, he just was so impressive. And also, he worked a lot in Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Yes.
And he was actually, here's some weird little trivia, Robert Keith was Richard Kimball's father in The Fugitive.
Really?
So there's our Roy Huggins.
There's our Roy Huggins connection.
And also...
It all comes back to Roy Huggins.
And Robert Keith is the police chief in the Brando famous biker film, The Wild One.
Oh, yes.
Now, Robert Keith, though, like a lot of entertainers, he was married a lot. he was married 4 times. Now, with his second wife, they would have a son, Brian, who would go on to successfully follow in his father's footsteps and become a very popular actor with a very long career. Brian Keith, who, I mean, the guy was a great actor. He's most famous for being the lead in Family Affair.
Right.
The TV show. But so Robert Keith was married 4 times. His second wife, as I said, he had Brian with. Now, Robert Keith's third wife was the infamous Peg Entwistle. Now,
who was very famous for her demise.
Yes, she was an actress who, once things weren't working out, she jumped to her death from the Hollywood sign.
Yes. And supposedly, it was like the day after she jumped to her death from the Hollywood sign, an offer came to her apartment from a studio for a contract.
Yes.
So, I mean, it was like, just wait one day, just wait one day.
And, oh boy. And tragedy. Now, once we were talking about Robert Keith and I looked up his credits, I realized he's actually in one of my favorite Twilight Zones. He's in the episode Masks. And that one, if you haven't seen that one, oh my goodness. In fact, Twilight Zone is now, the entire run of the Twilight Zone is now on Netflix. And I was able to just go and watch this episode. And Robert Keith plays a guy who's dying, and he fills out his will, and all of his greedy children and relatives show up because they want his money. And he has one little caveat in the will, and it has something to do with having to wear a mask for about 12 hours. And anyway, but so we're huge fans of Robert Keith. He's so good.
And one of the little quirks of his character is that he likes to write down the last words of the people that they kill, that Eli Wallach kills. He collects, in a little notebook, he collects their last words. And, that's very, very interesting. Very creepy, and I don't know why Quentin Tarantino didn't steal that, or why somebody else hasn't stolen that. I'm sure that I'll steal that for something.
Yeah, we'll use that. And so we're going to go to our next clip. Because, as you saw, Eli Wallach was really getting on the wheelman's back, the guy they've hired to drive the getaway car. He didn't like the car he picked. They thought he wasn't being careful enough. And what comes out is that the wheelman has a slight drinking problem. Now, of course, he claims it helps him. But these guys are professionals. Robert Keith and Eli Wallach are not happy at all about this. And this is a scene in the car between Robert Keith and the wheelman. And the wheelman has asked if he could maybe just get one little bottle of booze to help steady his nerves.
But would you mind if I were to buy just a little jug? Just take a belt once in a while. I don't want to get a heat on. I just...
No.
Did he have to kill that kid?
When you live outside the law, you have to eliminate dishonesty. That kid, as you call him, made a deal and tried to shake us down. That's fundamentally dishonest, or he had to die. Besides, a dead man can't point at you.
Your buddy gives me the creeps. What does he think? He's the only expert around here or something?
If he continues to listen to me, he'll be the best.
Oh, man. That Sterling Silliphant dialogue, man. Now, the wheelman, some of you real film freaks out there might have even recognized his voice or go, God, that voice is familiar. He's played by Richard Jekyll, who he's a favorite actor of mine.
Right.
He just had a long I think he had a 5-decade career because he really started working when he was young. A lot of you might remember him in The Dirty Dozen. I think he's like second in command to Lee Marvin. He's on the side of the military guys trying to whip these guys into shape. He's so good in that. And I was so happy for him because later in his career, he was Oscar nominated for Best Supporting Actor in the terrific Paul Newman film that's based on the Ken Kesey novel, Sometimes a Great Notion.
It's a great performance.
Now, and again, he's in Come Back Little Sheba. He's in Ozana's Raid. He's in Battleground. And
it's terrific in that.
He's actually in one of my favorite Westerns, but he's killed in the opening credits. He's in The Gunfighter. And Gregory Peck gets rid of him before the opening credits are done. And then also, Phoef and I are big fans of some of his 70s work when, he had to make some B movies, some drive-in movies. But oh my God, Richard Jekyll is in Day of the Animals, which is one of our favorite animal attack movies.
Yeah, we'll have to do a segment on animal attack
absolutely.
movies.
And then Richard Jekyll is the lead in Grizzly, which is basically
another great animal attack movie.
Yes, and Grizzly came out after Jaws. They were like, hey, sharks scare people. Let's do a version of, I'm sure they wanted to call it Paws or Claws or something, but that's a terrific movie too. And so Richard Jekyll, Robert Keith, and Eli Wallach are the bad guys. And we just love this movie so much, and this was fun to go down a little.
Yes, also the climax of the movie is shot at the Sutro Baths in San Francisco, which it burned down in 1966, but it was a huge landmark. Everybody went there. It was an ice skating rink and all that.
Scene.
There's a great scene with an ice skating rink. I won't spoil it for you, but it's wonderful. And it's just a great capsule of San Francisco at that time.
Yeah, and again, these movies are out on DVD. I think even a few might be on YouTube. But as we've already mentioned, there are tons of great underrated crime noirs. And so if you enjoyed this podcast and the subject matter, actually let us know. Because we'll be thrilled to do another podcast down the line, just like this one, because it would be easy to just highlight 3, 4, 5 more great.
To be honest, we could do a podcast that was just on film noir, and it would take us years to finish up all of them, because it's weird. It's really strange that in about a 10-year period of time, there were so many movies made, and very few of them were A movies. Very few of them were big studio massive releases, like Double Indemnity was, but still, most of them were programmers. They were on the middle ground, but they were great. And I think they were probably good because of that, because they could fly a little bit under the radar and be creative.
And boy, do we love it when we find one of these. It's just so much fun. But by the way, as we said, if you do want to reach us, you can go to our Facebook page, Film Freaks Forever, and also, you can also go wherever you find us, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, and give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. It really does help. In fact, JJ Podcast himself looks over such things, and we really want to stay on JJ Podcast's good side. He's a powerful, powerful man. But actually, we so appreciate this. Recently on iTunes, I'd like to share with you guys, someone who goes by the moniker Boy Mayor wrote this. These guys' movie knowledge goes deep. There are quite a few cult movie podcasts you could choose from, but rarely do you hear one with such pedigree. You can tell Phoef and Mark have been friends and writing comedy together for a long time. Their love of some of these uniquely quirky flicks really shows through, and their on-mic chemistry is a delight. And you are a delight.
I am. And by the way, I would like to say that I did not write that.
No, we didn't write that. That's what's so nice is every now and then we go on to iTunes.
I don't even know who wrote that, actually.
No, we should probably Google who young mayors throughout the country. He claims to be a boy mayor. But this really does help. Every hit we get, they really do pay attention to the numbers. And then also, folks, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram. But on there, we're Film Freaks Forever, but the 4 part is literally the numeral 4.
So Film Freaks, numeral 4 ever.
Yes, exactly. And then we have to give a big shout out to the Writer's Bone Network and Daniel Ford and Sean Toohey. We couldn't do it without them. And also, we have to give a huge thanks to Dan Radlauer. First of all, for the use of his top-notch studio, but he is our audio engineer, and he wrote our great theme music, our intro and outro music. We love him, and we couldn't do it without him either.
More than that, he has to sit through what's on the other side of the glass while we do this podcast, and we do it totally in the nude.
That's true. But we only do that because Dan's totally nude.
It's just a part of our process.
That's right. Oh my God, the cops are here. They think it's a Robert Keith pot party in Beverly Hills in 1960. But also, most of all, we want to thank you, the listeners.
Yes.
We couldn't do it without you. And thanks again for yet another edition of Film Freaks Forever.
Forever!
Yay!
Housewives can get awfully bored sometimes.